Hi, all. Welcome to our week on diversity, aging, and poverty. And this is the first of a couple of lectures in this area, just focusing really on the diverse aspects of our older population. So, we've been talking a little bit about older adults in general and how they function versus other age groups or that time in life and how it's perceived. But we also have so many different groups within older adults themselves that's really important to look at some of the pieces of that and how we as budding gerontologists going into different fields can really embrace the diverse nature of older adults and learn how to be more culturally competent and know where to look too. And that's one of the important things that I want to emphasize today is you're never going to know everything about every diverse group of older adults that there are. But you will know some tips on the things you should be looking for. And I'll have at least one resource, and there'll be several more in the course, about where to look if you're interested or if you're up against a particular group, serving a particular group that you're not very familiar with. This is the Diversity and Aging lecture. And it's also referred to in some circles, particularly healthcare, as ethnogeriatrics. And ethnogeriatrics, pardon me, is a way to describe healthcare, the intersection between diversity, aging, and healthcare, essentially. So that's why we also bring up that term. Okay. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a tip on the larger or broader types of groups that we think of when we think of diversity or cultural groups. And this can intersect with, of course, older age at any point, and we can have older adults with developmental disabilities, older adults with disabilities acquired later in life, etc. But one of the major groups that is in this addressing model of diversity, put forth by Pamela Hayes, who is a psychologist and has written extensively on diversity, is age. And it's the number one only because it fits in the A, but age or generational status is a major mark of diversity, right? So why diversity matters is because within all of these different groups, there are characteristics that set them apart, that make them very unique, and that dispose them to some disparities. It could be mental health, cognitive health, physical health, social well-being, etc. But a lot of these groups that you see in this list, depending on which group you're in, minority, majority, that can dispose you to some risks or some benefits. And diversity matters for a lot of reasons, but one of them really is the major disparities that happen if you are a member of one or more of these subgroups. So when we look at these groups, there's age, of course, developmental disabilities acquired in later life, things like maybe spinal cord injury or becoming paralyzed. Also, your religious or spiritual affiliation, ethnic and racial identity, which is one that we're very familiar with. Socioeconomic status, right? That's how affluent you are. Lower, middle, upper class, those are the major large cuts in those groups. Your sexual orientation, so the LGB elders. Gender identity would be also considered a newer kind of group to this, which would include transgendered elders. Indigenous heritage, so whether or not you are an Indigenous person, so that would be Native or Native American. That would be, for example, Aboriginal if you're in Australia. Your national origin, so are you from the US? Are you from a different country? And right now there's a lot of press about immigrant status, particularly from specific countries, and how that affects your day-to-day life of being an immigrant or not being from the US originally. And we have a large burgeoning population of older immigrants as they come and join families who may have been here for a while, or they come from countries where they may now have refugee status because they're war torn or there's genocide happening there. And of course, gender. So male or female, or man or woman, or other, of course. Then there's, of these, right, so we can see a lot of intersections of these types of groups. Like you can be a lower class, older adult, who is a racial or ethnic minority, or it can be white, poor, older adult, etc. So there's a lot of combinations of these groups that are going to set you up in a way for success or not in life, just given some of the benefits that go along with statuses, right, or the beliefs, the environmental conditions, the social status of some of these groups. So when we think broadly about how diversity should affect us as practitioners, one of the things that we need to think about is being culturally competent. Whether or not you're going to be interacting with older adults, or you're going to be sort of looking at them from a numbers sense as a researcher, developing programs, certainly you need to be aware of the different diverse groups and some of the cultural factors that feed into those groups, so that when you design programs for them, try to understand some of the health disparities, mental health disparities, cognitive health disparities, that we do so in a way that is appreciative and respectful of the cultural values that go along with some of these groups, and help us to really understand some of those phenomena. And that's really versus ethnocentrism, which is the tendency to view all groups or other cultures from your group status. So basically, you have a big pair of glasses on every time you look at another group that shades them just like your group, whether you're majority or minority, and that is being ethnocentric. We know from research that approaching care, program development, all of those types of things from an ethnocentric viewpoint is going to lead to some failures, because again, their groups have very meaningful differences, and approaching them or treating them in certain ways and understanding the risks of that group is important when you're going in and trying to help. So what is cultural competency then? It boils down to about 3 broad categories. So to be culturally competent, you need to be aware of your own personal biases and their impact. So instead of being ethnocentric, you understand, oh my goodness, I have this big pair of, for me, it would be white, middle-class female glasses on, and I need to understand that and be able to take them off. So I'm aware of my own personal biases and the impact that might have on, how I interact with other groups. And certainly there's a knowledge component here. So when you're working with a specific population, let's say you're working with older Black or African American females and trying to develop a program to help with heart disease or something, you certainly should have some specific population-specific knowledge about their own, about that culture, how health has interacted with that particular group, what you might be looking at. Are they higher in heart disease or lower than some groups? Do they have specific outcomes that might be, well, this treatment might lead to a slightly different outcome for this group or not? You want to have some specific knowledge of their cultural values, how health interacts with that, and if you don't know where to get it, there are certainly a lot of places that can provide culturally competent information, as well as being able to be savvy in your own selves and be those local scientists and be able to look up information. So you don't have to have all of this stuff and be ready for absolutely every group. But when you get in and work with a particular group, then there's a need to have specific knowledge. And then also you need skills. So There are a lot of culturally competent types of skills, including, empathic listening, being able to have a non-judgmental stance towards another group. If it's a particular group, there may be a particular set of skills, like I'll talk about with LGB elders. There are a lot of organizations that put out specific types of skills to work with XYZ population. So you need awareness, knowledge, and skills to be culturally competent. And there is a lot of literature out there about this as well, if you're interested in getting more. One resource put out by the U.S. Administration on Aging is the Toolkit for Serving Diverse Communities, and this is going to help organizations or small groups or even individuals be able to kind of approach different diverse groups and really set themselves up to be culturally competent. I'm just going to share, if I can grab that. I'm going to share that with you just so that you can see on the screen here. So this is the diversity toolkit from the Administration on Aging. I'll just show you some of the table of contents here. Talks about assessment, so that's that awareness of yourself and assessing the community that you have as well for their specific needs, and identifying resources about the community, designing services, and then evaluating those services to make sure that you are in fact providing culturally competent care for them. And there's a lot of resources in that toolkit. And this is just one of many that you're going to see for culturally competent resources. Okay. So here we go. Back to the PowerPoint. All right, so let's take a look at some of the diversity that exists among older adults. So we're going to look at age, older age, and then gender, LGB older adults, and racial and ethnic minority older adults in this particular one. There's lots we could look at, but let's just take a look here. So when we think about the sort of gender by age group diversity, we have more older women in general than older men. So older men tend to die earlier. That's something that we're familiar with as gerontologists. But the gap does appear to be shrinking. Over the years, so when you look at 1990, 2014, and then the projected in the green, we are seeing a close in the gap between how many men and how many women are alive at these different older age groups. So men, why might that be? So some disparities here are that men generally have more health problems than older women, but that again depends on the type of disease. Some diseases are more prevalent among older women than older men. Other issues that this brings up when we think about disparities among groups is that this puts older women at a bit of a social disadvantage. We think about the lack of a partner or your partner dying off earlier than you and being widowed for longer if you don't repartner. So it has a social impact for women too, and as we know, social connection is important for overall health. So, just one example of how a diverse group can be affected. Okay. So we'll get back to here. And we have now move into racial and ethnic diversity by age. So you saw this little graph here before in our population aging lecture, but the bottom line here is that we want to look at what we have currently and the future projections, which is figure 1 over here. So table 1, around 2008, these figures are from. So when we look at the breakdown of racial and ethnic groups among those who are from 0 to 64 versus those who are older, we do see some differences, right? So that we have more white, older adults that seem to be surviving into older age, or that the percentage is more than we see probably older African American or Black individuals. Asian is going down as well. Hispanic is going down as well. And, a lot of the a lot of the percentages for the racial and ethnic minorities are going down as we get into older ages, and the white non-Hispanic is getting larger because they're surviving at higher rates. And you can see some of the projections as well for the future. When we look at 2010, 2020, 2030, 2040, and 2050, we see fewer and fewer older non-Hispanic whites percentage-wise, and our minority populations appear to be growing. So they may be still less than younger, represented less than younger racial or ethnic minorities, but overall, our racial and ethnic minority olders are growing over time, so we're getting more and more. In fact, in California, they project that older non-Hispanic white population is going to drop from current rates at 70% to around 50%. So in some areas, we see a greater influx. And what that means is just we need to be able to treat it and meet the needs of a growing, diverse, racial and ethnically diverse older population. So that will be very important to understand. Health disparities, etc. You also saw this one in the population aging lecture, but when we look at this, we see the life expectancy by race, ethnicity, and also age. So when we look, we also see it broken down between males and females, so you can see here, but the graph shows you that the average number of years that people are expected to live past that average age listed, 78.7. And when we look at that, we see, or that age of 65. So for the total population for both sexes, you're going to live about an average of 19.1 years past that, just the average Joe. If we break this down by racial and ethnic groups that are available here, we see that that Black or African American older adults are tending to be at the most or at the least advantage here, and that goes for females for the most part, and males as well. And we see this Hispanic paradox, which was highlighted in your readings. So lower, the Hispanic paradox here is that even they live longer than other groups, but they do have lower SCS, which tends to put you at a disadvantage to be poorer. So they wonder, well, why are people who are Hispanic living longer if some of the other diverse cultural tenets that they have should say that they might not? And one hypothesis is that smoking rates are very low comparative to other groups and older Hispanics than others, but we don't really know why yet, so we're still figuring that out. But that's one interesting thing about older racial and ethnic groups is that older Hispanics tend to live the longest than other groups. And older African Americans tend to live the least long. All right, so another group that we want to focus in on is LGB and trans olders. So when we don't have a lot of great information about this, and this might not surprise you because a lot of the big population surveys that we have don't include questions about your sexual orientation or your gender identity. So we have no way to catalog what is happening among older LGBT adults. So this is one thing that we've been trying to address in the last probably 5 to 7 years. We've had a group of people who have, in the US, a group of researchers who've been trying to get a larger sample of LGBT older adults to try to get some better statistics. And what we do know is that about in around 2010, or as many as 1.6 to 2.4 million LGBT older adults, and that is projected to grow exponentially by 2030, so as many as up to 7 million. And when you look at health outcomes by gender and sexual orientation, so older women and older men, And then the blue bars are those who are LGB olders, and then the red bars are those who are straight olders. We see a lot of the time that regardless of sex or gender in this case, we see older LGB adults with more health and disability problems than their straight counterparts. So this is one reason why diversity matters, is because if we know this going in and we have some idea in that number 2 cultural competence knowledge of the specific prevalence rates, like AIDS, HIV isn't the only disease that they're more of. There's more disability in general, more obesity, particularly for older lesbian women, more asthma, more diabetes for older lesbian women. So when we look at some of these diseases, we know that they're just proportionately represented in these minority groups, which begs us to target them, to help them more, because they have a larger need potentially. One example of cultural competence for LGB elders I wanted to show you is Project Visibility. And this is from Boulder County, Colorado Department of Health. So this Project Visibility is a training module that they have put together to help carers and healthcare providers to be able to understand the LGB older community more and be able to see those specific needs. First of all, be aware of their own biases and the limitations that might have some good specific knowledge about this group that might help them understand where the risks are for this particular group, and then to give them some specific skills to be able to address some of the need in this group. So this Project Visibility was a very cool project that they put together for training providers, and this has been picked up by other people as well. But if you're interested in looking at it further, I would definitely Google it and look, because there's a lot of impetus right now, if you're going into long-term care in particular, about having cultural competence for different groups. And LGB olders is one, as we see a lot of stereotyping and discrimination that happens in long-term care for this group, and not just this group, but this group is one of them, and in particular trans older adults. So we have a lot of people like SAGE is an organization, SAGE, capital, all capital, if you'd like to Google them, and they're devoted to producing culturally competent products for this particular group. And they have one for trans older adults, one for LGB older adults in nursing home care, and there's a lot of that happening for trainings and cultural competence for nursing homes, as we see more and more discrimination happening, identifying it and noting it's a problem and trying to address it. So this is something you may come up against if you're in going into more nursing home administration, things like that, and some of these resources will be very helpful. And now let's go back to this idea of diversity in aging and in general. The impetus for us is to understand that diversity is an issue, and that we can't just treat all older adults the same, right? Because we say we can't treat older adults like younger adults, we shouldn't be treating older adults all the same either. There's so many within group differences when we look at these just 10 broad categories of difference, and the fact that we need to practice some cultural competence or gain some awareness, knowledge, and skills to be able to treat some of these groups or approach some of these groups with more cultural competence so that they get adequate and respectful care. So this is just food for thought for this semester as we go along and think about some of these things. And there will be differences among these groups, particularly when we talk about income distribution, health, and health disparities. Those are big ones that are definitely going to see differences, advantages and disadvantages among these groups. So, all right, that's the diversity lecture, and the poverty lecture is also this week, so please do definitely check that out. And don't forget to email your budgets worksheets in so that we can see how we stack up against the average either near poverty or in poverty older adult for our monthly incomes. And I look forward to talking with you again.